didn't know what to do. And the Soviet Union, when Lenin died, and then again when Stalin died. So there were, Ron, are you asking a question or just chewing a pen?
They're just chewing a pen.
Okay. All right, so these are the 5 different ways. I'm going to talk about 3 different ones. A lot of problems stem from earlier events. So if we look, for example, at Afghanistan. Okay, so, yep, we know where it is. It's right there. It's kind of in the middle of the world. It's handy. Operation Enduring Freedom. Why did America send troops to Afghanistan?
Stop
No.
Oh,
This is recently, yes.
Didn't have after the 9/11, they thought that when Al-Qaeda was in Pakistan and they moved to Afghanistan, so they just naturally flowed that way.
Okay, anyone else?
There was training.
We wanted them to turn over bin Laden and get rid of the training grounds that they had there, and the Taliban refused, so we invaded.
Okay. So the good guys are Hamid Karzai, so the Afghan elite, political elite who had been exiled for a number of years, were brought back in, and democracy prevailed and there were elections. And the bad guys were definitely the Taliban, aided by Al-Qaeda. They were insurgents, including the Mujahideen. They were irrational, they were uneducated, they were violent, they were unprincipled. But what about Rambo 3? Hey, oh, don't tell me it's not. This is a really good clip. Hang on a second.
And the Taliban versus the commies equals mayhem. Rambo 3, Wednesday at 11:55 on OT2.
Okay, I did actually used to have a better one, but they got done by the copyright thing. So there's this really good bit where he goes to actually talk to the Mujahideen, and everyone's very civilized and sitting around drinking tea. And Rambo looks like this unkempt character who's coming in all sweaty and disheveled and with ripped clothing. And the Mujahideen are very elegant Muslim scholar warriors who are sitting there listening to him and talking, and they're talking about how their electoral process works. And these are the good guys in this movie, and yet suddenly they're awful and unprincipled and uncivilized and barbaric. Okay, but why? Why, if they were the good guys back in the 1980s, why did they turn bad? And of course the reason is the Cold War. But you would be amazed. I taught Vietnam War in 2009 when I first got here, and a lot of my students in that particular class were ROTC, and there were 3 of them deployed to Afghanistan. And those of you who are doing Vietnam War with me know that I'm not really teaching it from the American point of view. When they got there, they hated me for the first 3 weeks, and they came round. They were very, very nice boys. 2 of them still write to me every now and then and say, I remember what you said about reading that Vietnamese nationalist poetry in the first couple of weeks and how I thought it was stupid, but now I'm reading stuff that the Afghanis are writing and I kind of see their point. And I think, yes, that's a really good moment for me. I've actually succeeded in making people see something from someone else's point of view. And as historians, we can do that. We as historians can remember that actually in Rambo 3, Stallone was fighting with the Taliban, and now we're at loggerheads. The West, why did that happen? What did we do to make them hate us? What did they do? What kind of policies did they pursue that suddenly made them unpalatable to the Western point of view, and so forth? We could even go back, if we wanted to a fear of communism, if we want to sort of explore why things in Iraq are happening today. This is one of my favorite anti-communism posters. I love looking at Stalin as an octopus. All right, then we have things like this in Indonesia. For those of you who aren't familiar with Indonesia, it is a country in Southeast Asia. I could go back a long way and talk about Indonesia, but I'm going to start in mid-1965 because there was a situation in which Indonesia was confronting Malaysia on the island of Kalimantan, and basically Indonesia were claiming the island and Malaysia was saying, no, you can't have any more of it. We have these areas up here. Okay, there's another situation going on in which the US government is very worried about Indonesia because, you know, Vietnam is going on, there's this whole thing about containment, we have to stop communism spreading, and Sukarno, the leader of Indonesia, was a member of the Communist Party. Now, communism had been used in the Dutch East Indies as a tool of resisting colonialism. Okay, communism was seen, like Ho Chi Minh and Viet Minh really saw communism as something that was a really good, viable alternative to colonialism and capitalism. Okay, so this is happening in Indonesia as well. When the UN accepted Malaysia as a non-permanent member of the Security Council, Sukarno withdrew Indonesia from the UN. So Sukarno is a ruler in Southeast Asia that, although is, you know, neutral to all intents and purposes, is displaying some very anti-Western sentiments at the same time. Okay, and he also withdrew from receiving aid from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank in August. And he then announced on the 17th of August 1965 a Jakarta, Phnom Penh, Hanoi, Peking, Pyongyang axis, which sort of sounds like it should be a comic book. But people were very, very worried because, of course, Pyongyang is North Korea, Peking is China, Hanoi is, you know, where Ho Chi Minh lives, Phnom Penh has Sihanouk in control, and who knows what he's going to do from one day to the next. And so it was all seen as being very, very deeply frightening. And so Frank Wisner, who was deputy director of the CIA planning wing at the time, said, "I think it's time we held Sukarno's feet to the fire." And so the CIA launched a whole lot of really zany efforts to try and oust Sukarno, including, because he was supposedly a devout Muslim, they made a fake porn movie featuring Sukarno and a Soviet flight attendant. They didn't actually feature Sukarno at all, but they did a couple of this kind of thing. And they actually used Bing Crosby at one point as like a stand-in for Sukarno, not for the porn bits, but just sort of consorting with Soviet flight attendants. Okay, so this is all building up to a situation that happens in which a rumor goes around that Communist Party members have rounded up 7 Indonesian army generals, have killed them, mutilated them, and have thrown them into a crocodile hole. Okay. This then starts a huge anti-communist purge throughout Indonesia that goes on until March of 1966, in which about 3 million people may have died, but at least 500,000. And we still don't really know the exact numbers of people. And so the idea is that people are supposed to root out and destroy members of the Communist Party of Indonesia. What of course actually happens is that all kinds of people take advantage of this call to purge the communists and identify people they've had long-standing grudges with or are jealous of or want to take over their shop, their business, their network, whatever. They take this opportunity to kill them, and they particularly target Chinese. Because Chinese, of course, are naturally communist, because China is communist. Never mind that the Chinese who have been living in Indonesia have in some cases been there for 400 years and never actually been to mainland China. If you're Chinese, and that's just the end of it. I'm going to show you why it's important that historians actually get into Indonesia and start talking about this in more detail. This is something, I'm going to just fast forward a little bit.
Orang di sini banyak kira-kira
lebih bisa sampai
72-year-old Balinese dancer Ketut Viga was one of the executioners. He shows us how he and his men killed people said to be communists on this village street in the western part of Bali. He says the army provided him with lists of names, mostly neighbors and other villagers. He often killed them using a sword that he still proudly keeps. He claims the military forced him to become a mass murderer, but he performed the task willingly.
Saya sedikit pun tidak punya rasa kasihan, tetap taat. Karena dia ini ada bunuh, taat. Dia ada bunuh, taat. Apalagi dia Pak, kata senjata api, dijegat. Nggak punya rasa kasihan, tidak ada.
Tapi senang.
Senang. Mungkin karena itu Tuhan yang memberikan harus begitu ya. Kayaknya begitu. Nggak ada rasa apa-apa. Ya kan biasa aja. Udah tahu udah orang-orang semua takut terusnya.
Kau amor, arukiyo.
For nearly 50 years, most of the mass murderers have remained silent until this film was released, The Act of Killing.
Pegang 5, inilah di tempatnya nih. Aku bilang itu darah, kantor darah.
Jadi saya bermasalah. Ini antara gajang Cina sama gajang mertua. Anak cikam juga. Karena Cina juga.
In the documentary, executioner Anwar Congo gives a chilling and detailed account of the murders he committed in the 1960s in Medan. He says he helped kill at least 1,000 people. In the film, he proudly reenacts the killings.
Saya kan orangnya orang bioskop. Saya setiap nonton, karena kan bisa ketidur, saya lihat jalan cerita film itu menarik sama saya. Marlon Brando dengan adanya. Jadi datang inspirasi saya bilang sama kawan-kawan, timbang kalian mukulin orang sangat menyiksa berat, iya kan? Coba cari satu jalan yang saya pun tidak banyak membersihkan lantai dari kotoran.
The film can't be officially shown in Indonesia because it can't pass the censors. In secret, we show it to Anwar Congo, who is watching it for the first time.
Lantas saya ambil satu kursi, meja begini. Saya tepatkan pas di lehernya. Jadi begitu ini sudah tempat plaster tertutup, mereka duduk di sini. Sini duduk sini sambil mereka keluar melihat. Ngelihat keluar lah. Melihat jalan. Jalan sampai bioskop kan sudah tertutup. Disuruh.
Saya mengharapkan kalau film ini bisa, yang namanya komunis di Indonesia itu jangan sampai keluar. Karena komunis ini satu wabah besar yang tetap mengganggu negara kesatuan.
Kenapa itu wabah besar, Pak?
Kenapa begitu? Siapapun orang mesti tahu dia. Kenapa? Saya untuk dunia di luar, saya senang dengan komunis ini tidak menguasai Indonesia.
Jadi Bapak nggak takut mereka yang menonton pikir apa yang sama?
Itu terserah buat penonton.
Bapak
Okay, I'm going to, he doesn't feel guilty at all.